So, but at any rate, I guess first thing we need to call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I can do that. Senator Howell. Senator Saslow. Senator Barker.
Here.
Senator Barker is present. Senator Ruff.
Here.
Senator Ruff is present. Senator Marsden.
Here.
Very good, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, very good. Charles, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This morning, staff will summarize the governor's proposed amendments to the biennial budget. We will be referring to a summary document that the staff of the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee drafts collaboratively with the staff of the House Appropriations Committee. Excerpts from the summaries were sent to the members yesterday. And for the members of the public who may be watching, you can find summaries on the Senate Finance and Appropriations Committee website under the State Budget tab. Mr. Chairman, I'll also just point out that Secretary Strickler, Secretary Ball, and Secretary Ring are on the line as well. At this time, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go ahead and hand over control to Jason, who will start the summary on agriculture and forestry.
Thank you, Charles. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Let me bring that up. In the Secretariat of Agriculture and Forestry, the combined actions in the introduced budget provide a net decrease over the biennium of about $800,000, which is primarily from spreading the unallotments that were adopted in Chapter 56 to the agency, and primarily in the first year. Within the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, there is a proposal for a new Virginia Agriculture Food Assistance Program, and provides $600,000 for this purpose. There is legislation this afternoon in the AC&R committee, Senator Hashmi's Senate Bill 1188, that effectuates the purpose of this proposed $600,000 grant fund. The next two actions within VDAX are restorations of positions within the food safety program and within the watershed implementation plan staffing that had been adopted during the 2020 session, but then were subsequently unallotted. These amendments put the staffing back in the second year. There's some savings realized from the wine promotion fund due to that are attributable to the collection of tax revenues from Virginia wines and ciders. And then there's the action to distribute the unallotments from Chapter 56 to the agency's base budget. Within the Department of Forestry, there's a proposal for a multi-agency incident management team, which would work jointly with the Virginia Department of Emergency Management and provide a training component for VDEM emergency preparedness training jointly with VDEM. Because the main thrust of this initiative is in public safety, I think we'll jointly explore the issue with the Public Safety Subcommittee, and I think how their determination is on standing up new programs at VDEM will influence the decision-making process here within this subcommittee as well. There is a proposed restoration of about $500,000 for watershed implementation plan activities for tree planting initiatives in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. In addition to that funding, when I get to the overview of natural resources, there is a proposal to direct a new $500,000 to forestry for a tree planting initiative as well, to bring that to around $1 million a year. There's the restoration of $500,000 for the hardwood habitat program that was approved last year, and a complementary initiative to provide about $300,000 to expand the hardwood seedling capacity for hardwood tree seedlings. And finally, in capital outlay, there is phase 2 of the Charlotte County Forest Acquisition, which is about $6.8 million in non-general funds. Mr. Chairman, because there is not a lot of significant budget proposals in the Agriculture and Forestry Secretariat, next week when we address natural resources issues, we were intending to have that focus mainly on the Natural Resources Secretariat. So we haven't scheduled the Ag Secretary. If there are any questions on this, there are friends and Madam Secretary, as well as the Deputy Secretaries from Agriculture, are here to answer any questions. If there are no questions, Charles.
Thank you, Jason. Jason, the hardwood program, one of the things I've heard in terms of the whole need for tree planting and what have you is that our nursery stocks are limited in terms of how many trees can be provided. Do you know anything about how many trees or that amount of money can purchase and where they would get them from, and are we putting them close to rivers that are going to flood them out?
Mr. Chairman, I think those are good questions. I do know several things about that, but there is an individual on this call, Secretary Ring, who knows a whole lot more. So I'm going to let her go ahead and answer the question for you.
I'm sorry, I couldn't understand you.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me okay? This is Secretary Ring.
Yes, ma'am, I can.
All right, great. Thank you for that question. So we have actually two items in the budget. One is the hardwood initiative that is really important to the Commonwealth. It is a legacy item. As you know, we've had a great pine reforestation program in the state. This hardwood initiative would be the first of its kind, and we have most of our forests in the state are hardwoods. So 80% of our hardwoods in the state need to ensure that we have sustainable hardwood forests in the future. We need to plan for that. It's complicated. It can be more expensive for our private landowners, but it's extremely important for wildlife habitat, for all the many benefits that we receive from our forests. And I think we also have our DWR director on the line, and this is an important initiative for them as well. But for hardwoods, you have to really look at natural succession, and I won't get into the weeds too much on that, but more so taking that approach and making sure you're managing the forest correctly versus reforestation or afforestation. With our riparian buffer efforts, we appreciate the additional funding through the Water Quality Improvement Fund to look at urban tree canopy. And then there's also funding in the budget. It's one-time funding for our nurseries in Cremora at the Augusta Forestry Center. That's where we grow most of our hardwood seedlings for riparian buffers, for wildlife habitat, for other purposes. And at that nursery, we have been growing, less than 3 million. There's an extreme demand for that, for bare root seedlings. They don't really exist in the Southeast. And so we are not competing with the private sector by growing these. We need to expand our capacity in Cremora, Virginia, and we'll be able to do that with this one-time funding that helps us increase capacity, additional equipment that's needed. And once we're up and running after that first year, that will be a self-sustaining program. We will not need to continue with that state funding, but it's really critical. We're hearing from our conservation partners, from private landowners across the state, and to meet our requirements in the watershed implementation plan, this is necessary. Happy to answer any more questions you have.
Thank you, Secretary Ring. One more question, then I'll throw it open to the floor. Is there any difference in the size of plantings, trees, for riparian purposes versus those for reforestation, where water is not going to be a threat to wash them out? Is there anything unique about using it in a riparian boundary effort?
Great question. Again, it sort of depends on the site. It depends on the soils and what species and what you're hoping to accomplish in that area beyond just the buffer. But often we use bare root seedlings. We're going to have a higher succession rate, survival rate for those trees long term. And if managed properly, again, we can use tree shelters, other things to protect them from wildlife in those early years until they get established. In urban areas, we're going to want to plant, obviously, a bare root tree, or not a bare root tree, but we want to look at larger trees. So there's certain conditions when you want to do that. But in a riparian buffer area, depending again on what you're trying to accomplish, it can be less expensive, more efficient to be able to use bare root seedlings. But again, a combination depending on what we're looking at, urban versus rural settings, farms versus forested areas, et cetera.
Thank you, Secretary Ring. Members of the committee, any questions for the Secretary or for Jason? All right. Thank you very much, Secretary Ring, for getting up early and being here with us today.
Absolutely. And wouldn't miss.
Thank you. And who's up next, Charles?
Mr. Chairman, that would be me. I'm going to go ahead and summarize for you the items in the Secretariat of Commerce and Trade. Thank you, Jason. In the Commerce and Trade Secretariat, the introduced budget proposes net increases totaling $69 million over the biennium. There's a net reduction in the first year of $3.4 million, followed by a 21% increase in the second year. There are 5 amendments in the Economic Development Incentive Payments Holding Account. The first is a technical adjustment to plan payments under the Virginia Investment Partnership Grant Fund. The second is a $2.3 million deposit to the Special Workforce Grant Fund. This was established as an incentive fund for Amazon Web Services in 2018. The introduced budget also provides $5.6 million to an incentive fund to be created by legislation that Senator Howell has introduced this session, that's Senate Bill 1156, intended to award grants to a qualified technology company with a new facility located or to be located in Fairfax County. That would be the first installment of a multi-year custom performance grant program totaling $22.5 million. There's also an additional $2 million from the general fund in the second year to restore previously unallotted funding for the Virginia Jobs Investment Program. And the last amendment is a technical amendment that distributes budget reductions from central appropriations to the agency budget. And there'll be one of these in just about every agency budget, so I won't hit on these in each agency, but I just want to call your attention to that technical amendment. And Jason, I cannot see your screen if you are showing the summary.
Yeah, Charles, we did not have anything on the screen during your.
Yeah, I think it's corrected now.
Okay, thank you.
All right, moving to the Department of Housing and Community Development. The introduced budget proposes an additional $15.3 million and 4 positions for the Virginia Telecommunications Initiative. That includes $15 million in the second year to level fund broadband grant funding at $49.7 million in both 21 and 22, and an additional $250,000 to fund additional positions for administration. There's also a recommended increase in the Housing Trust Fund of $15.7 million in the first year and $25 million in the second year. The proposal would increase the appropriation to $70.7 million from the general fund in FY21 and $55 million in FY22. This would include $28 million designated to continue the Virginia Rent and Mortgage Relief Program when monies allocated from the Coronavirus Relief Fund have expired. There's also recommended $3.3 million to restore previously unallotted funding for the Eviction Prevention and Diversion Pilot Program at the Department of Housing and Community Development. The budget also provides $600,000 from the general fund in the second year to restore previously unallotted funding for the Southeast Rural Community Assistance Program, or SRCAP. SRCAP provides low-income and rural communities with technical assistance and support for water, wastewater, and community development projects. Moving on, the Virginia Main Street Program, there is an increase in the introduced budget that proposes $3 million in the second year. This would be a significant increase from the current level of funding, which is $500,000 per year. This would be intended to increase outreach to predominantly minority and immigrant communities. There are 2 non-general fund appropriations, one related to coronavirus relief funds that the agency administers. That's in the amount of $30 million. There's also an NGF appropriation associated with the percentage of payment program. This is in accordance with legislation that was passed in 2020. The next item is a technical adjustment, as I mentioned earlier, which just moves reductions from central appropriations to the agency. And in the Department of Labor and Industry, there is a proposal to increase personnel in occupational safety and health programs. This would be a $1.5 million increase in the second year to fill 12 positions that have been unfunded. This would be restoring funding that was included in Chapter 1289 that was subsequently unallotted. A technical amendment, as I mentioned, the next item is in Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. The budget recommends a reduction of $547,000 in the second year. And this is associated with some savings that would come along with the proposed agency restructuring. There is a bill to be introduced, and among the changes would include a realignment toward more renewable energy development and a restructured workforce. In Department of Small Business and Supplier Diversity, budget includes just over $700,000 from the general fund in the second year to establish and support a statewide unit to strategically source small woman and minority owned or SWAM participation in large dollar Commonwealth contracts. This was also a restoration of funding that was included in 1289, but subsequently allotted. In the Virginia Economic Development Partnership, the budget includes an additional $5 million in the second year to expand funding for the Business Ready Sites program. You will recall that Chapter 1289 had just over $12 million in additional funding for the program that was unallotted. The budget also includes $500,000 at VEDP to establish an Office of Education and Labor Market Alignment. This is in accordance with legislation that has been introduced in the 2021 General Assembly. And we'll move on to the Virginia Employment Commission. Mr. Chairman, there's three items here, and I'll just point out that we have extended an invitation to Commissioner Hess to speak to the subcommittee next week to provide some more information on these. In the meantime, Secretary Ball is on the line and can address questions if there are any, but I will just highlight those for you here. The first is a $10 million increase in the second year for one-time support to cover costs associated with the increase in staffing around the COVID-19 pandemic. The second is interest payments on federal cash advances. The budget includes $7.5 million the second year for estimated interest payments due in September. And then the last item in the BEC is an additional $5 million the second year for costs associated with programs in the CARES Act that have to be programmed into the unemployment insurance system so that the system can continue in its efforts to modernize the IT system there.
Charles, just a quick question here. I see these are in the second year. It seems to me that the need for additional support there would be in the first year as we're starting to come out of the pandemic, as opposed to the second year. Why second year funding?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is that right now that the majority of the funding that supports those positions comes from the federal government, but that funding is anticipated to run out or expire, and there will still be a need for general fund support to keep some contract positions online into the second year of the biennium.
Aha, thank you.
In tourism, there is an increase in funding for the Heart of Appalachia Tourism Authority. That's an increase of $100,000 in the second year. Again, this is also funding that was included in Chapter 1289, but unallotted. And the last non-technical amendment is in the Virginia Innovation Partnership Authority. The budget does include an additional $750,000 proposed in the second year. This would be for rent expenses at locations in both Richmond and Northern Virginia. As you recall, before the restructuring, the Innovation Entrepreneurship Authority occupied space in the CIT building in Herndon, and that building was sold. Mr. Chairman, that's my summary of commerce and trade, but happy to take questions if there are any others.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ruff.
Charles, can you go back to the Main Street section? Will that mean more Main Street locations or enhancing current ones?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ruff, I'm not sure. As I said, the way I understand it is the intent is to be able to expand outreach to more communities, whether that means necessarily more locations. I'm not sure. I'll find out, or perhaps if someone's on the call that might know the answer.
Good, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Other questions from the committee?
Mr. Chair,
Senator Barker.
Charles, I presume that some of the things related to rent relief and evictions and those types of things that have proposed general fund dollars going into those, that we could, in essence, supplant that with some of the monies that we'll be getting from the congressional stimulus package that was passed at the end of December this year. Is that a correct assumption there from your perspective?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Barker, I think that'll be the case. It's unclear to me at this point, to what extent the federal dollars could be used to backfill the money that we had set aside in the Housing Trust Fund for rent and mortgage relief. Also, just to point out that the federal rent relief provision applies to rent and utilities, but not to mortgage relief. So there would still be a need
Right.
for federal fund dollars to address mortgage relief. We have asked Eric Johnston, the director of DHCD, to present to the subcommittee next week. And one of the items that he intends to cover is this very topic. So hopefully we'll have more information for the subcommittee next week.
All right, thank you. Yeah, that'd be very helpful.
Thank you. Other questions from the committee? Okay, thank you, Charles. What do we have next?
Mr. Chairman, I have the natural resources area next. I will note that Secretary Strickler, Deputy Secretary Jennings, and all of the agency heads are present here. Next week, we have scheduled Director Christman and asked the Secretary if they'd be able to give us sort of a comprehensive overview of these proposals. So I'm going to move through them relatively quickly so that we can get to Mr. Murray's presentation. Picking up in natural resources, the introduced budget provides a net decrease of about $13 million over the biennium, with many restorations to the unallotments that happened in Chapter 1289, which I will get to quickly. The largest action at the Department of Conservation and Recreation is the appropriation of $39.4 million to the Water Quality Improvement Fund. This will provide for $35 million in practices to be put on the ground, in agricultural best management practices. From that amount, $10.5 million will be outside the Chesapeake Bay watershed, $24.5 million will be inside the Chesapeake watershed. There is also an ongoing base adjustment to the appropriations for the Soil and Water Conservation Districts to provide technical assistance, boots on the ground, to get farmers enrolled and help ensure these practices are implemented properly. We'll hear more about that next week. Also, there's a proposal for $5 million for Project Harmony, which is the establishment of the Harmony Living Shoreline Memorial. This, as you are aware, on Senator Stewart's property, there was some reprehensible riprap discovered. The administration has gone to great lengths to establish a very thoughtful program to remove these and repatriate these tombstones. We look forward to hearing more about that initiative next week as well. There is a proposal for $3.5 million to acquire land that would be put under easement for natural resource conservation value, and then donated in kind, I believe, to the Chickahominies as part of a restoration of some tribal land area. The parcel is historically known as Mamana Hunt, and it would have restrictive use covenants. I think one of the questions we would have going forward is whether or not this should be considered to be an acquisition through the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation, or it should be done through the direct appropriation if the General Assembly elects to move forward with that proposal. There's $1 million for increased support to the Natural Heritage Program. This is the program that supports our natural area preserves. And there is a proposal for $500,000 in additional state park operational support, which was unallotted. Given the visitation at both the state parks and the natural heritage areas, these seem timely proposals. The agency does have a request for $300,000 in pandemic-related costs, which we are exploring to see if they can be, if the new federal stimulus or federal coronavirus relief funding can be used to supplant that $300,000. There's also a proposal to restore funding for a dam safety and floodplain management position to provide assistance in compliance with the National Flood Insurance Program. In the technical distribution of reductions from Chapter 56 and two small non-general fund actions. First is just the appropriation of additional non-general fund revenues of $200,000 to reflect increased revenues from park operations, and $500,000 non-general fund in the first year and $800,000 non-general fund in the second year in capital outlay for acquisition of additional in-holdings and contiguous properties to a series of parks. There are some changes to the acquisition list. They are small, and we have asked the department to explain how that process works at the meeting next week. At the Department of Environmental Quality, all of the reductions for the air, land, and water protection programs are proposed to be restored in the second year. And there are two language amendments, one that addresses the hydrofluorocarbon requirement language, and that simply says that if EPA establishes more stringent rules, that the hydrofluorocarbon rule for Virginia would comply with the EPA ruling. And there is the proposal to re-implement the water quality enhancement fee at a rate of equal to 5% of the amount paid for a credit on the credit exchange program. You will recall this proposal from the special session was rejected. I think the secretary is planning to speak to his proposal at the meeting next week, though he is on the line today if you would like to have a conversation. At the Department of Historic Resources, there is a proposal to replace the Robert E. Lee statue in Statuary Hall with a statue of Barbara Johns. And there is restoration of funding for a cemetery preservationist position. At Marine Resources, there is just all of the proposals at Marine Resources are small, and they are restorations of things that were unallotted during the special session. That includes the Coastal Resiliency Manager, the acquisition of unmanned aerial vehicles for patrolling fisheries, and acquisition of outboard motors. Mr. Chairman, that completes the staff overview. Are there any questions?
Questions from the committee? Thank you, Jason. I believe Charles is back to you for having Mr. Murray address us.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that completes the staff summary. So if Stephen Murray is ready to share his screen, we will go right into his presentation.
Thank you, Charles. Stephen, take it away.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members. Really appreciate this opportunity to provide you all, this invitation to provide you all an update on some of the economic development progress that Virginia is making despite the pandemic, to talk about what the recovery outlook looks like in the Commonwealth, and finally, how we can work to accelerate that recovery with some of the initiatives included in the governor's budget. And welcome any questions, of course, as always, that any of you may have for me. So I will just jump right in. Obviously, it goes without saying that the pandemic was quite an economic setback for Virginia. But the good news is, despite that, in FY20 and through today, there's a lot of good things that are happening still in economic development in the Commonwealth. Last year, through the end of FY20, we had a very solid year for business development despite the setback of the pandemic. We actually announced projects totaling more than our targets for our annual targets for jobs and capital investment. And even with a huge drop off in new lead generation, we nearly hit those targets as well. We got to about 88% on VDP generated leads, 96% on VDP generated leads converted. So a really solid year for business development despite the pandemic. One of the most important things that we did was to partner with Secretary Ball and the Governor's Economic Crisis Strike Force on a variety of issues. We helped to analyze the economic impact of the pandemic on our economy, on the various industry sectors and the various regions of Virginia. We helped to identify new suppliers of PPE. We helped to provide analysis that ultimately helped to guide development of various economic relief efforts the administration led as well. So we're really proud to be a part of that. One of the exciting things at VDP the last couple of years has been the launch of the Virginia Talent Accelerator Program. You all remember we've talked quite a bit about catching up to the rest of the states and really ultimately leading the rest of the states in custom workforce solutions. Just a few years ago, Virginia was not even ranked among the top 10 states. Just 2 years now, almost 2 years into the existence of this program, we're now ranked number 3 and number 4 in the country in the 2 major national rankings. So really pleased about that. One of the things that we wrapped up about a year ago was the development of the first comprehensive international trade plan for the Commonwealth of Virginia. We've started implementing aspects of that that do not require additional funding. And another thing that we're quite excited about is the Tecton Investment Program. You may remember this came out of our HQ2 bid. Collectively, the universities are producing more new degrees in computer science than were envisioned so far. So that's going great. And terrific progress in Northern Virginia with Virginia Tech and George Mason with their new graduate campuses that are currently in design with construction starts expected in the not too distant future. One of the things we completed also was really the nation's first comprehensive site characterization initiative. We were able to characterize more than 450 identified development sites across the Commonwealth, thanks to funding provided by the administration and the General Assembly. That's really given us great intelligence to be able to move forward. We think a better understanding of our site competitiveness than any other state in the country. Of course, it also revealed that most of our sites aren't ready for prime time, but it really gives us a blueprint to move forward. And then finally, through many of those initiatives, as well as other efforts like marketing, like our rural and small metro tech centers initiative, we've been making good progress on rural development opportunities as well. So we have faced big economic setbacks, but there's still progress happening despite those things that are challenging us. So let me talk a little bit about the economy and where we're at now. Since the pandemic, we've gotten past the worst part of it, but we've still got a long road left to get back to full strength. First of all, this chart shows you the change in employment from pre-pandemic through November, which is the latest available when we put this together. You can see on average, we're down about 6.4% in total employment in Virginia. If you look at unemployment, it doesn't look that bad. The reason is a lot of folks that have lost employment are not looking for employment, either because of childcare challenges or other healthcare related issues, a variety of reasons. But we do see significant job losses across Virginia. It does vary quite a bit across Virginia. On this chart, you'll see the darker blue areas are those that have currently are down, or at least in November, were down the most. Two big reasons for those changes essentially have to do with the makeup of the economy. Those regions that have a greater weight in those sectors that were most heavily impacted, like hospitality, like retail, as you're well aware, felt greater impacts. Additionally, some of them had major employers that for one reason or another had special impacts for them as well. But this is something we're tracking very closely, and really our dominant focus at VDP right now is doing everything we can to help accelerate economic recovery. If you look at employment by industry sector across the Commonwealth, this is what it looks like here. The bars here, the largest bar, if you will, including both the dark red and kind of the hashed red lines there, that was sort of the worst losses that we experienced in each industry sector. Not surprisingly, as you're aware, leisure and hospitality, as well as non-essential retail, had the biggest negative impacts. The good news is a really big chunk of the jobs that were initially lost have come back. In fact, collectively across the Commonwealth, we're roughly halfway back to full strength, and certainly heading overall in the right direction, although we had a little bit of setback here recently as we've seen a spike in the coronavirus. The couple areas that actually have done slightly better, essential retail, of course, had a little bit of a loss initially, but actually has added employment. Construction has added employment as well. But one thing that's really clear as you look at this slide is we still have hundreds of thousands of jobs that have been lost that have not come back yet. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute. As we think about these job losses and the employment stress that the pandemic has placed on the Commonwealth, it's important, I think, to think about this not just in terms of lost jobs, but there's also other impacts. You have folks that have perhaps had 2 jobs before they lost one of those 2 jobs. They would still count as employed, but their actual income has gone down significantly. You've had people that have lost hours. You've had folks that have lost overtime. And you have folks that have lost a job and for, as I mentioned earlier, either for childcare or health reasons or other reasons, are not actively looking for work. So overall, you've got a few 100,000 Virginians who are in a worse position employment-wise than they were before the pandemic began. So we've got a lot of work left to do to get people back to work. One of the things I wanted to highlight for you is that this has been a recession and an economic impact that has had widely varying impacts on people across the Commonwealth. What you're looking at in this chart is the change in employment by the level of wages of the individuals. So that top line there is the folks that make more than $40 an hour in Virginia. Bottom line, those that make less than $20 per hour, and then the one in the middle is those in the middle, those the $20 to $40 per hour. As you can see, those high wage folks really never lost a large percentage of employment, only down about 2%. That group is overwhelmingly folks with a bachelor's degree or above. It's disproportionately male, it's disproportionately white. When you look at that group that's experienced the biggest drop in employment, those that make less than $20 per hour, largely concentrated in hospitality and retail, for example, they actually lost more than 30% of their jobs at peak and are still, about 13% down versus where they were pre-pandemic. That group, in contrast to that higher wage group, disproportionately has less education than a bachelor's degree, is disproportionately female, is disproportionately people of color. So we've experienced both a K-shaped recession. I think to some extent, we're also going to see a K-shaped recovery. So as you think about what it looks like over the next few years as we work to get back to full strength, it's really those lower wage workers who are both in a more sensitive position pre-pandemic, but are also facing much bigger job losses than the higher income folks. So to us, that really suggests a great sense of urgency to try to get back to full strength as quickly as we can. There's a number of forecasts out there for what recovery looks like nationally, but there's a few groups that are actually doing state level forecasts. What you're looking at here is one of the most respected ones, Moody's Analytics. This shows where we were during sort of the pandemic, and you can see the big jump back up. We are starting to recover. But what really sticks out here, this is Virginia specific forecast. What really jumps out is they're suggesting we would not get back to full pre-pandemic employment in the Commonwealth until middle of 2023. I think there's a good chance we can do better than that, especially if the vaccine rollout goes well nationally. But that's the forecasts that are there now. Now you might ask, how is it that we're so far down in employment and the revenues are still holding up in Virginia? And it gets back to that previous chart. The folks that have lost employment tend to make a lot less money, particularly those that have been most heavily impacted than the folks that have not lost jobs. So that's why you see a bigger negative impact on the sort of gross employment numbers than you do on revenues. Additionally, for company size, the larger, well-capitalized companies, for the most part, have continued, many of them actually doing better than they were prior to the pandemic, whereas your sort of Main Street retailers, your small, mom and pop small businesses, on average have been pretty negatively impacted by this. Many of them, of course, facing potential closure. So this is a really serious issue, and we're trying to think of everything we can do to try to get folks back to work as quickly as possible. The other reason I think we should all have urgency is there's, in addition to those sort of economic divides by education, race, ethnicity, and so forth, there's also a geographic divide. This is also Moody's Analytics. You can see that gray line is the one I showed you a moment ago. The other thing we did was to look at if we split the Commonwealth into sort of the urban crescent, if you will, Northern Virginia, Greater Richmond, Hampton Roads, and the rest of Virginia, largely the predominantly small metros and rural regions. There's an expectation that the rural horseshoe or the predominantly rural parts of Virginia could take roughly 4 years longer to get back to full strength, early 2027. Here again, I think we can do better than this, but that is the forecast that's there right now. So all this leads us to a great sense of urgency about doing everything we can to accelerate recovery. And I'm going to talk about that now, so we can end on more of a happier note. Let me first say one really positive thing about Virginia and this pandemic is that some of the trends, the big trends really that we're seeing economically, have largely been accelerations of trends that were already underway. Most predominantly, the acceleration of the digitization of business. More people purchasing things online, more people streaming videos, just a whole range of things related to e-commerce. So we're seeing several sectors where Virginia already has a leadership position that are actually experiencing growth now and growth that is expected to continue. Think about cloud computing, where we're the clear global leader, particularly in data centers, autonomous systems, e-commerce, food and beverage processing, as people are buying more packaged goods in grocery stores versus restaurants and so forth. All the delivery vehicles and in general involved in logistics. Think about Volvo in the New River Valley. Think about Morgan Olson in Southern Virginia with last mile delivery vehicles. And of course, logistics. And then the great work that you all and the administration have done in broadband investments also going to help us to get out of this faster. So these are some of the things that are working in our favor, but nevertheless, and by the way, these are some of the things that have helped us to outperform the country as well. But again, we still got some ways to go. We see kind of four big opportunities to accelerate growth in terms of sort of thematically, if you will. One is that there is a shift that we see. I don't think it'll be huge, but there's a significant shift of manufacturing and supply chain companies to want to be closer to their end customers. That should mean more opportunities for North America. We're already seeing some of those in Virginia. So doing everything we can to be really competitive for those manufacturing projects, very important for especially the smaller metros and rural regions of Virginia. Second, everything related to what we loosely call digital Virginia. Think about cloud computing, software, data centers, autonomous systems, cybersecurity, experiencing tremendous growth. The Tecton Investment Program was a great initiative that you all supported before the pandemic. It's even more impactful now as we see universities across the Commonwealth increasing graduates in computer science, computer engineering, and related fields. That's really providing the fuel that we need to grow that sector and continue growing that sector. We're going to see that probably be our greatest growth story in the Commonwealth for many years to come. And that will certainly be huge in Northern Virginia, but it also will be significant across several other regions of the Commonwealth. One of the most interesting opportunities has to do with remote work. We do think that obviously there was a huge amount and still is a huge amount of remote work in Virginia and nationally. But even after the pandemic, there's an expectation that some of that will continue on a permanent basis. I do think we need to manage our expectations a little bit in that I would guess at this point, most of it will be what I might call hybrid remote work, where people work remotely part of the time, but they go to the office part of the time. So those folks obviously aren't going to be relocating. But there will be a significant percentage of folks who do relocate and do work remotely permanently. For a state that with the best quality of life in America, as Virginia enjoys, we think that can be a significant opportunity for us. And we're doing quite a bit of work right now, both internally and with some third-party support, to try to get our arms around how big is this opportunity and how best can we capture it, and how much of that will be an opportunity for the smaller regions of Virginia versus the larger ones. So we'll have more to say about that in the future. Finally, as you think about the folks who have lost their employment, I didn't show you the detailed forecasts of getting back to full employment, but Moody's and others would suggest that even when we get back to full employment, the mix of jobs across industry sectors and occupations will be somewhat different than before. We would expect to see more business services, more tech jobs, fewer jobs in retail, probably fewer jobs in hospitality, at least for a long time. So many people, certainly not the majority that have lost their jobs, but tens of thousands of those currently unemployed will not only not be able to go back to their previous job, they won't be able to go back to their previous occupation. So reskilling will be really critical. Think about things like the G3 initiative the governor's proposed, the Virginia Talent Accelerator Program, that's our program, VGIP and others, that either help create jobs and reskill people for them, or at least reskill people for growing occupations. So with all that in mind, I'd like to just highlight briefly the major budget initiatives that we have for this session, as well as a few legislative initiatives as well. First of all, let me point out on this first item. So our number one priority, and we think the biggest thing that VDP can do to help accelerate economic recovery, is to complete the expansion of the Virginia Talent Accelerator Program that we launched a couple of years ago with your support. As a reminder, this is our custom workforce initiative. It is an incentive to companies, but not a cash incentive. What we offer is world-class customized talent solutions, recruitment and screening of employees, as well as development of fully customized training and delivery of that training at no cost to participating companies. This is the preferred model that most traded sector competitive site selection projects have Virginia is going from the back of the pack to the front of the pack very quickly. This funding would just simply, it's 4.7 million that would allow us to make this a statewide program to be able to support the amount of demand that's out there. It would help us attract and train thousands of additional jobs per year over and above what we currently can do. By the way, on this chart, just to say, I mentioned those 4 big economic opportunities. On the right, you can see kind of the check marks for how these initiatives relate to those. I did want to highlight the Virginia Talent Accelerator Program expansion was in the governor's original introduced budget for the biennium. It was unallotted, as were most of the other, new or expanded items in the budget. Did not initially get included in the FY22 amendment. So it's not in what the governor proposed for next year. I think that's probably because we didn't communicate clearly from VDP that we actually needed the funding in the second year of the biennium, not in the first year of the next biennium. We are ready to expand. We have the demand to expand and to be able to use those resources next year. We're very grateful that Senator Morrison is offering an amendment to include this back in or reallot these dollars. And the administration has indicated that they fully support this initiative. Second is to restore funding for the VGIP program. That's $2 million, just taking it back to the level it was before. That was also previously in the budget, so that's a reallotment. This is the most commonly used program incentive program across the Commonwealth that helps companies to attract and reskill talent. Third is the Business Ready Sites program, huge opportunity to address typically the most common reason we lose a manufacturing or distribution project is a lack of a fully prepared site. So this is a significant down payment on a bigger long-term opportunity to create thousands of additional jobs, attract billions of dollars of additional capital investment. Between this, the site development effort and the Virginia Talent Accelerator Program, those two things together will be a powerful tool to attract more high quality, capital intensive, technology intensive projects to rural Virginia and smaller Metro Virginia in particular. Item D here is to create the Office of Education and Labor Market Alignment. I believe Mr. Kennington covered that earlier. This is a really exciting long-term initiative, something that SHEV has been working on for a couple of years now in partnership with us and other entities across Virginia. This would enable us to provide a unified, consistent source of information, trusted source of information and analysis on linkages between education and employment outcomes to help advise you all on which programs are producing good returns and where the gaps are, to help advise job seekers so they can make more informed choices about what type of education or training that they pursue, and to provide benefits to employers as well. So not a large investment, it's $500,000, but the potential impact of this over time is quite significant. And finally, as Mr. Kennington mentioned, we have the Microsoft project, both funding and accompanying legislation. That's a 1,500 job cloud computing R&D center. Really great win, probably one of our most exciting wins from the last fiscal year. So I'm just going to talk about each of these briefly. On the Talent Accelerator effort and VGIP, one of the really unique things about Virginia is this powerful combination. Some states have a world-class custom workforce program like the Virginia Talent Accelerator Program. Some have workforce grant programs like VGIP. We will be the only state that would offer companies the choice to choose which one works best for them, because typically, basically every other state has one or the other. And company would not use both, but if they want a full class, fully customized solution, they would use the Talent Accelerator Program. If they want to handle their own efforts and be able to offset some of those costs, they would use VGIP. So it's a very powerful combination. To give you a sense of the impact of the Talent Accelerator Program, in just the first couple of years, we've already announced projects that are underway that are creating more than 2,000 jobs, where the Virginia Talent Accelerator Program is doing typically all the recruitment and training for those projects. Additionally, we have more than 3,000 jobs worth of active prospects that are considering utilizing the Virginia Talent Accelerator Program. So you can see right now we're starting to see dots across Virginia where these activities are happening. With the additional funding, we'll be able to serve the entire Commonwealth. We have a couple exciting announcements coming in the near future with this program, but this is, to me, one of the most exciting things that we're doing in workforce development in the Commonwealth today. VGIP, I think most of you are familiar with. It's, again, the most commonly utilized incentive across the Commonwealth. What you're looking at is some of the project totals with jobs and capital investment totals by major region in Virginia over the last several years. Many thousands of jobs, many billions of dollars in capital investment. All the incentives are paid post-performance. It's a really terrific program. We're just trying to take it back to its normal funding level. I mentioned site development. What you're looking at here is a map of the roughly 466 sites that we characterize. These are all sites that are supported by their localities that have been identified for development. The dark blue bubbles, there are not too many of them. Those are the ones that are actually ready to be competitive in the marketplace. The light blue ones are the ones that need some additional investment to get ready. This is a matching program where the state would provide funding to match against local support with greater ratios for distressed or double distressed localities. Very, very large ROI, because we're not talking about typically we're not talking about making the capital investments. We're talking about getting all the planning and engineering, right-of-way work and so forth done so that we're ready to quickly place infrastructure once we actually secure a real project. Really, really excited about the impact of this. I'll just briefly mention the Office of Education and Labor Market Alignment. This is something that many agencies have contributed to. While it will be based at VDP, we will be implementing this work in partnership and collaboration with others like the Governor's Chief Workforce Advisor, SHEV, VCCS, private sector companies as well. Really, really exciting initiative that I'd love to talk with you about more when we have more time later on. I mentioned the great Microsoft win. This was one of the major Employment Investment Commission wins of the last couple of years. Really big project that helps accelerate our rapid growth in the cloud computing sector. So finally, I'll just briefly touch on our legislative initiatives and then would welcome any questions or comments you have from me. 4 key legislative items. First one, we talked about telework. As we attract more projects, and again, we're not yet sure how big this is going to be, but we do think it'll be material. There will be more companies that'll have projects where a large portion of their employees will work from home. In many cases, these are high wage jobs. In many cases, they create new types of employment opportunities, particularly in smaller metros and rural regions. This bill would not have any new additional cost. It would simply allow us to partially or fully waive the capital investment requirements or local match requirements for utilization of incentives for projects that predominantly have people working from home. They still have to meet all the wage requirements and all that, but it would be really about attracting more telework opportunities with the existing resources we have. And Senator McPike is carrying that. The second bill, this is a House bill, with the new minimum wage increases that you all adopted, I think, in the last year. We need to update the VGIP standard. So previously it was defined with respect to the federal minimum wage. Obviously, Virginia is going to be well above that now. And so we're suggesting that the new schedule would be 1.2 times, at least 1.2 times the Virginia state minimum wage would be the minimum required to participate in VGIP with the same phase-in as the Virginia Minimum Wage Act. Third is simply the legislation that Hashmi is carrying to implement the Office of Education and Labor Market Alignment that I talked about a bit previously. And finally, the fourth bill there that Senator Howell is carrying is to cover the MEI Commission Custom Performance Grant for the Microsoft Cloud Computing Center that I mentioned. So to be clear, first of all, just thank you all so much for all the support that you've given us at VDP and to all the economic development efforts in Virginia. It's not just about what you all have done for our budget, but other things that you've done in terms of creating a great business environment, great public education institutions, the big investments in broadband, the big investments in infrastructure. All of those things are helping position Virginia for a healthy economic future. The things that I'm talking to you about today that I've just gone through will help us accelerate economic recovery and help us to continue to work towards shared and healthy economic growth for many years to come. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to take any questions that you all may have for me.
Stephen, thank you very much for that very comprehensive report. We appreciate it, and we appreciate the work of VEDP. You've done a great job. A couple of questions. How would you describe right now our pipeline in terms of what's entering it, what's coming out, what it looks like at all points?
Thank you, Senator Marsden. So I think there's two striking points I would make. One is that we certainly, starting just within a few weeks of really getting into social distancing nationally, we did experience a large and sustained drop in new leads coming in. But as we worked on, as we did our work over time, what we found was that overwhelmingly the leads that were dropping out that we weren't getting that we would normally get were from smaller companies. So the second point was that while the overall leads had gone down, the total size of the project pipeline we're working on, the last time I checked, is actually slightly bigger than last year on jobs and considerably bigger on capital investment. So the average project size that we're working on is on both jobs and capital investment is considerably larger than last year, even as the number of leads is significantly down year over year. So we're actually expecting to have a pretty nice fiscal year in terms of project announcements. I think we're actually running ahead of schedule right now. We will be down on the absolute number of leads, but because the size of the projects is bigger than what we were experiencing last year, we were still looking at pretty nice outcome overall. That said, we need a lot more jobs, obviously, right? We need a couple 100,000 more. Now, a lot of those jobs, as soon as we get out of as soon as that we get widespread access to vaccines with national distribution, and people can, we get to a point that we can relax social distancing, safely from a public health perspective. I think we're going to see a lot of those jobs sort of naturally come back pretty quickly. But what we've got to really be thinking about is the small businesses that may not be able to sustain themselves completely through that. There have been some great initiatives to help, but obviously still many struggling. We've also got to think about those folks that won't be able to go back to their jobs. So there's definitely going to be a significant tail. It's hard to say exactly how big it's going to be, but certainly many tens of thousands, maybe over 100,000 jobs to sort of get back to full strength that we're really going to have to work hard on together.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. This may not be a VEDP question. I know I've been working, for the past 8 months or so, 6, 8 months, on the question of 5G. And again, this may be an administration question, but does 5G and its rollout, how does that impact our economic development opportunities? How does that fit in? And does the Commonwealth have a plan to move 5G forward in any way, or are we just leaving that to the private sector to develop it?
I'm certainly not the expert on that, I'm afraid. I mean, I will say that I think from where I sit, I would expect that the private sector telecom providers will certainly roll out, future generations of cellular that will be competitive in Virginia because we're one of the most important markets for them in the country. Now, obviously, that's not going to be even across every region of the Commonwealth. From our perspective, the much bigger issue that we struggle with, I should say, I'm not saying 5G is not critical, it is critical, but is broadband, to the home especially, right? Because you just have a lot of folks that are missing out on education and employment opportunities, having those, the ability to be connected to high-speed broadband at both a work environment, but also at home. I just think is absolutely critical for us to be a 21st century state. 5G will definitely help also, but unfortunately, I'm not the expert, I'm afraid, Mr. Chairman, to be able to answer your broader question about that.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Anyone else on the call care to weigh in on that question? Okay, very good. Members of the committee, any questions for Mr. Murray and VEDP?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, who is that? Oh, Senator Ruff.
Stephen, are you getting many companies from Europe looking at coming to Virginia now?
Yes, sir. Quite a bit. I mean, we are certainly down, as I mentioned earlier, in the absolute number of leads, but the size of the projects has increased on average versus last year. The other thing that I'm finding very positive right now is we're seeing significant activity across Virginia. So this is not just Northern Virginia or the Urban Crescent. We've got lots of good announcements that have either already happened or are in the works to happen in other parts of the Commonwealth. We're seeing continued activity in data centers and a whole range of advanced manufacturing opportunities in food and beverage processing and logistics. We're seeing significant opportunities in pharmaceutical manufacturing. We expect to have multiple announcements in that sector over the next several months. Technology centers that are looking for lower cost markets. We're seeing several projects looking at significant technology centers outside of the Urban Crescent location. So that's encouraging as well. Overall, we're feeling pretty good about the level of activity, particularly considering that, we're still in the pandemic. That said, we need a lot more than we're currently seeing in order to get back to full employment, to be able to beat those Moody's forecasts that I talked about earlier.
Thank you, Senator Ruff. Other questions from the committee? Stephen, thank you very much for the very comprehensive and thorough report. Charles and Jason, and do you have anything else for us this morning?
Mr. Chairman, that completes the agenda for today.
Could you review very quickly what we're to expect next week?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, we have invited the Director of the Department of Housing and Community Development, Eric Johnston. We have invited the Commissioner of the Virginia Employment Commission, Ellen Marie Hess, and in the areas of natural resources and ag and forestry, I'll let Jason speak to those speakers that have been invited.
Mr. Chairman, we've invited Director Crispin since most of the spending proposals in the introduced budget are in the Department of Conservation and Recreation, but we've asked Secretary Strickler and the agency heads to be available. I think they might do a sort of a quick combined presentation that would lead with Secretary and have Director Crispin bring it on home for you. That is the plan.
Well, thank you very much, and I hope they take us up on our invitation. So thank you very much. Anything else from the committee? Without anything further, the committee will rise. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.